everybody. My name is Carrie and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with the Akron Zoo. So today we're going to be talking all about raptors. So if you don't know, raptors are actually is another name for something called birds of prey, which typically incorporate your hawks, your owls, birds like that do a lot of hunting and use their big talons in order to help them with their hunting. And today specifically, we're going to be talking all about diurnal and nocturnal birds of prey, or raptors. So diurnal is a big fancy word that means daytime. So those are your animals that are awake during the day. And then a lot of you probably know nocturnal is the big fancy word for animals that are awake at night. So diurnal day, both start with a D. Nocturnal night, both start with an N. And I think our first guest is getting ready to come out. In case you can't hear her, she is very excited to join us today. And Debra is walking her up right now. Actually has her quiet for a few moments, so we'll see how she does for you today.
All right. So Kechara, she's probably going to introduce herself here a little bit. Kechara is a Harris hawk, and this is a hawk that you would not find right here in Ohio. They are native to the southwest United States and then down into parts of Mexico as well. Now, I have the microphone. Kechara needs no microphone. And there are a couple of different reasons why Kechara is a very vocal bird. So, first of all, Harris hawks are different from all other hawks in that they're social. And that's not just during breeding season. It is actually all the time. It is the way they live. They live in a family group much like lions would or wolves would or dolphins. And their family group is set up very interestingly. They actually have a dominant female. She's the head of the family. And then there are generally 2 to 3 adult males that are part of that social group as well. And yes, she will breed with all of them. Then there are offspring. And the offspring can vary in ages. You can have the hatchlings from the current season, but you can also have older brothers and sisters that are still hanging out with the family group and acting as built-in babysitters for those younger brothers and sisters as well. And so part of her vocal nature is because of the fact that they're social. They are always talking to each other, communicating with each other, because they use those vocal cues when they're hunting. So not only do they work together as this family group to help raise their babies, but they also hunt together too, which is incredible. And it allows them to take down prey that is larger than they could if they were hunting on their own. So for example, if you look at Kechara, she is a full-grown female Harris hawk. And the females are actually larger than the males, and she weighs around 2 pounds, which is actually pretty surprising. Most people look at her and think she would weigh much more. She's a fairly big bird, but because she is a flighted bird, she is mostly fluff and feather, and of course those bones are going to be porous as well. So she does not weigh very much, about 2 pounds. However, one of their favorite prey items to take down is actually a jackrabbit. And a jackrabbit can weigh upwards of 12 pounds. So you can see the size difference. In a single Harris hawk, that would be a really difficult catch. But in working with their family members, it makes that possible. So here is one of the really unique ways in which they will hunt. These birds live in the desert, so there's not a lot of big, tall trees like we have here in Ohio. So they have to use things like maybe a cactus. And so you'll have one Harris hawk that will go and perch on top of a tall cactus, and then one of its family members will come and sit on its back. And then another Harris hawk will sit on that bird's back. And they may stack 3 to 5 birds tall. And the bird who is on top is the lookout. And when that Harris hawk spots the prey, it is going to take off after it. Now, the rest of the family members will disperse. They're watching the chase and they're staying within close distance, because that jackrabbit is really fast and has really good endurance, which means it can run for a really long time. That first Harris hawk may get tired. However, when it does, the second Harris hawk takes over, and then the third, and then the fourth, and they can just keep doing that until they exhaust the jackrabbit, and then dinner is served, and the whole family will share in on the meal. So that is one of the reasons why she is vocal. And for Kechara, she is what we would call an imprinted bird. Kechara was not raised by a Harris hawk family. She was actually raised by a human family at another zoo. She actually came to us from the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago. And because she was raised by humans, she sort of relates to humans in the same way that she would relate to a Harris hawk family. So Kechara has people here at the zoo that are part of her family. So I am one of them, Carrie is one of them, and she always likes to talk to us. But she also likes to talk to those people who are not part of her family, which in this case is our cameraman, Vince. And so those are some of the reasons why Kechara likes to put her 2 cents in during our encounter today. Now, another reason why she's especially vocal too is this is also breeding season for Harris hawks. And even though Kechara does not have a male here at the zoo, her body will still go through that egg production process, and she's actually right in the midst of that right now. We weigh her every day, and based on how her weights have been trending, we're pretty sure that there is an egg in there ready to come out any day now. And so she tends to be a little more vocal and protective of her territory and her space too. So that is Kechara the Harris hawk, and some of her really good diurnal features. First of all, of course, amazing eyesight. And all raptors are going to have good eyesight. But one thing you're going to notice that's different between her and the owl that you'll see here in just a few minutes is she has a very prominent brow ridge that comes out over her eyes. And that actually serves to shield her eyes from the sun when she's hunting. Very much the way that a baseball player, that brim on their hat, serves the same purpose. On some diurnal raptors like falcons, they actually have black marks in their feathers under their eyes. And that serves actually the very same purpose that putting black streak under the eyes for a football player or a baseball player just helps to deflect that sun glare so that they don't lose sight of that prey when they are hunting. Now you're going to notice coloration for the birds can be different as well. It's all part of the camouflage. And for her, her coloration is going to be different too, simply because she's not a native bird. The colors out in the deserts of Southwest United States are obviously going to be very different from our forest habitats here. And she's also going to have that bright white band on the bottom of her tail, because that helps the family members keep track of where the birds are when they're flying, similar to how the white tail on a deer can actually help babies to keep track of where mom is as well. And you are going to notice her feet. I wear a big leather glove when I hold Kechara, and that's because the feet are the weapon on a raptor. That is what they grab their prey with. Now, you're going to notice that Kechara's feet do not have any feathers on them, and the next bird that we'll be meeting is an owl, and he does have some feathery feet, and Carrie will certainly tell you why. So we're going to go ahead and switch birds, unless we might have some questions coming in.
We have 2 questions. Bunny asks, how did she end up here in Ohio?
So how did she end up here at the Akron Zoo? So she had originally been at the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago, and she had been a bird that was flighted during their indoor dolphin theater shows, actually. However, Kechara as an imprint, these birds can sometimes have some tendencies when they're around people that they don't know that are not always favorable if they're free-flighted. And Kechara had exhibited some of those behaviors during some of those free flight shows. And so Brookfield decided that it would be best to not free fly her anymore. So at Akron, though she is free flighted where she lives, and for her trainers, we work with her, and do flights in hallway areas and places so she can exercise. But when she comes out on a program, she wears falconry equipment. These are jesses and a leash. And that is for her safety and the safety of audience members as well. Just for the same reason that you would walk your dog on a leash, that's for their safety and the safety of other people you might encounter when you're walking the dog. It's the same case with Kechara too. Now when she goes back home, all of that stuff comes off and she gets to fly around.
How old would she have to be before she can first lay eggs?
So they actually will reach maturity. The birds generally are going to be born in late spring, early summer, and they, are capable of reproducing generally by that next year. But in the case of Harris hawks, they tend to delay that even though they are capable of reproduction, because the brothers and sisters will actually stay on as babysitters before they eventually venture out and form their own family groups. Now, what's really interesting for Kechara is she lived here at Akron Zoo for over a decade and never produced any eggs. That doesn't mean that her body wasn't going through hormonal cycles, but it never progressed to the point of an egg production. However, at the young age of 19, Kechara decided to start laying eggs. And she actually lays eggs about 3 times a year. And she is a great, I call her Mama Chicken. She sits on those eggs. She's a great incubator. And even during this time when she doesn't have an egg, but she's feeling that nasty feeling, she will incubate just about anything. For enrichment, a couple of weeks ago, one of our teachers gave her a whole yam just to put with and play with. And Kechara promptly put it in her little nest bowl that she has and sat on it for about a good week until it was starting to get pretty gross and we had to throw it away.
Does she have the opportunity to hunt?
So we don't feed any live prey, and that is actually for the safety of the birds. The prey so she eats mice and rats, and they come to the zoo frozen. They're thawed out in order to feed to the birds. And that really helps to make sure that those mice don't have any gross things on them, bacteria, mites, things like that could be harmful to our birds if they would ingest them. However, that doesn't mean that I just hand Kechara a mouse and she gets to eat it. She generally has to work for her food, either through training sessions. So I might go in and I have her food in a little cut-up training cup, and I throw a piece and make her go get it, and then have a piece in my glove and make her come back to it, make her, toss a piece up in the air and make her catch it. The other thing we do with her food too is also, we can wrap it up in packing paper, put it in cardboard boxes, just anything that she has to work and tear through to get at it, just like she would if she actually came across prey in the wild.
And before we switch to Hoot, Joe asked, how old is Kechara?
So Kechara is going to be 23. In June is her birthday. And, a raptor like this that has been hand-raised, has been in human care her whole life, likely can have a life expectancy closer to even 30 years, if not even into the early 30s. So I like to think that since she decided, she was going to start motherhood in her late teens, which would be the equivalent of 60s or 70s for us, that she's going to be around for a long time.
Oh, and one more. Cole and Piper are asking, are they like chickens? Do they need a male around to produce an egg?
Yeah, obviously not, because Kechara is the only Harris hawk that we have. She is a female, and she has produced those eggs without a male anywhere in sight.
All righty.
All right, let's meet Hoots.
All right, everybody. So this is Hoot, and Hoot is our great horned owl here at the Akron Zoo. You may have heard the commotion when I got Hoot out a few minutes ago, interrupting Kechara. But he is an owl that is actually found right here in Ohio. So they are mostly the largest species of owl that you're going to find here in Ohio. And he is our example of our nocturnal raptor today. Now, Hoot, he actually did come to us from the Cincinnati Zoo, but before that, Hoot was a wild bird that injured himself in the wild. He has one wing that's got some broken bones in it that never were able to heal quite right. So he came to live with us at zoos because he can't really go out and hunt on his own anymore. So he relies on people to supply him with his food, and that's how Hoot ended up living here with us. Now, owls are one of my favorite animals to talk about, and that's because they have so many cool adaptations that help them to survive when they're out there in the wild. Now, Hoot has some pretty amazing ones. Debra talked about with Kechara, her eyes and her talons and everything, but Hoots are a little bit different, being that nighttime bird. So if you start with his eyes, you'll notice his eyes are a little bit bigger than Kechara's were, and those help him to see really well in the dark. As a matter of fact, with his eyes, he really doesn't see very well in color. He mostly sees shadows, whites, darks, blacks, things like that. And that's because at nighttime, you don't really need to see in color. You can actually just go about and find your way around using just the shadows and the lights from the stars and the moons and things like that. So on the back of Hoot's eyes, he actually has special cells that just allow him to see light and dark. Whereas on the back of our eyes, or the back of Kechara's eyes, she has special cells that allow her to see light and dark and color. Now, a cool activity that I've done with Hoot and kids before that you guys could try right at home is I want you guys to get some crayons and take the paper. Hoot's apparently gonna stretch his wings a little bit. Okay, now you got your exercise. So that neat activity I was telling you about, you can actually take some crayons and you can take the paper off of them, or you can use markers or colored pencils and mix them all up in a basket. And then I want you to take that basket and a couple little slips of paper into something like a closet or a dark bathroom or a basement or something and shut off the lights. And I want you to pick one of those colors out randomly. And I want you to write on the piece of paper what color you think it is. And then, when you're done, turn the lights on and see if you guessed right, because that is the difference in those cells in the backs of your eyes. So he's able to see light and dark, but not so much in the way of color. Now, also those eyes are huge in the size of his head. So his head, underneath all of those feathers, is only about this big. So he's got a pretty small head. If we had eyes the same size in our head that Hoot has in his, they would be, comparatively, they would be the size of oranges or grapefruits. If you can imagine hauling around eyes that big, that would definitely help you to be able to find your prey in the dark. Now, another thing that helps him is, you couldn't really tell because he was kind of bouncing his wings off of me a little bit there, but when owls fly, they have very special feathers. You'll notice Hoot is a little bit fluffier and bigger looking than Kechara is, and that's because his feathers are structured a little bit differently. So Hoot is about the same size. He's only about 2.5 pounds, so he's got about a half a pound on Kechara. But his feathers make him look so much bigger. And the reason for that is his feathers are frayed a little bit on the edges, and that means when he flies, he can do it without making any sound at all, which is super cool. If you imagine an animal that is hunting at night, he needs to be able to sneak up on his prey, because those other animals that he's hunting for, since they're awake at night, they typically have very, very good hearing. So he wants to be able to be super sneaky and fly completely silently as he's hunting for his food. Another neat thing that Hoot can do is he's got really good hearing. So these here are not Hoot's ears. Everybody always thinks they're his ears. Those are actually just his feathers. That's where he gets the name Great Horned Owl, or these horns that he's got right here. And those feathers just kind of tell us how Hoot's feeling today. So when Hoot is mad, he sticks them straight up and down like exclamation points. And when he's asleep, he lays them flat down against his head. So right now, Hoot is not mad. He's just kind of interested in things, checking things out. He's not asleep, but he is kind of, looking around and seeing what's going on around behind me and all of that. But his ears are actually underneath his feathers then. And he's actually got one ear that sits a little higher and one ear that sits a little lower, so that he can exactly pinpoint where sounds are coming from out there in the wild. And that helps him with that triangulation of that sound. Now, you'll notice Hoot keeps turning his head. Have you guys seen him spin it all the way around? Probably not. Owls can't actually spin their heads all the way around. They can turn their head, if a full circle is 360 degrees, Hoot can do 270, which is like 3/4 of the way. So if I was an owl, I could look straight forward, I could turn my head, look over my shoulder, turn around, look over the middle of my back, keep coming and look over this shoulder. But I couldn't come the rest of the way, and I could do that in either direction. And he has to do that. We talked about those big eyes that he's got. He has to do that because his eyes are so big, they're kind of held in place by like a bony circle, and they're really kind of long and tube-shaped, and there's no room for muscle attachment to his eyes. So he can't move his eyeballs like we can. He can't cross his eyes, he can't make silly faces. His eyes are stuck in one spot, so he has to turn his head to make up for that. Now, Debra did mention with Kechara her feet. I want you guys to check out Hoot's talons there. His are a little bit bigger than Kechara's. I was actually reading the other day that hawks can carry off about half of their body weight with their food, whereas owls can actually, when they hunt, carry 2 to 3 times their own body weight off when they're hunting. Crazy, right? But if you notice also on his feet, he has those feathers. That's because Hoot is an Ohio bird. So he has to be here during the summer and the cold winters. So those feathers helps to serve kind of like socks for Hoot and keep his feet warm because he wants to protect those. Those talons are what he does most of his hunting with. So once he catches his food in those talons, then he bends down and uses that sharp beak to kind of tear off chunks that he then swallows whole. But the talons are what he catches his food with. And what might Hoot eat? Hoot is actually considered one of our apex predators here in Ohio, which means he is the top of the food chain. So for great horned owls, they will basically eat anything that is smaller than them and moves. So mice, rats, snakes, skunks even. They're the only natural predator of skunks, believe it or not, because they can't smell. Helps a lot if you're going to eat really stinky stuff if you can't smell. So they are the top of our food chain here in Ohio. During the daytime, it's the red-tailed hawk. So they kind of flip places depending on what time of day it is. So that is Hoot, our great horned owl. And now we'll see if there's any questions out there.
How old is Hoot?
We're not 100% sure just because Hoot was injured in the wild. But he came to us at about 5 or 6 years old, we're guessing. And then he's been here for 5 or 6 years old, so between 10 and 12 years old probably. And great horned owls, as Debra was saying, are fairly long-lived in zoos. It's not untypical to hear of them reaching their low to mid-30s in zoos, if not even 40.
Teresa is asking, what is he doing with his mouth when he's shaking?
Hoot's a little warm. The classroom's a little warm in here today, and Hoot's normally outside, so he is panting. So just like dogs do when they get warm, they pant. Owls do the same thing. They can't sweat, so he's just kind of cooling off a little bit in this classroom.
Kennedy is asking, why do they have a curved beak?
They have that curved beak because it works really well when they're kind of putting their beak inside their food and pulling the chunks off the bone. If you can imagine eating a chicken wing. Most people like to eat chicken wings. You have to use your teeth to pull the meat from the bone. He needs that curved beak to pull the meat from the bone.
Aubrey would like to know, how large can they grow?
So Hoot is full-sized. So he's a full-size boy. The girls can get to be about a third larger than what Hoot is, just because the girls get a little bit bigger when you're talking about hawks and owls.
Are they endangered? Question from Joe.
That's a very good question. Great horned owls are not endangered. However, they are protected by law. They're protected by the Migratory Bird Act, which means that it is illegal to mess with a great horned owl, its nest, or anything like that. So they are very well protected so that they don't become endangered and we don't lose our owls here in the United States, actually. All right. Any other questions?
We kind of answered the last question already. So there we go.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I hope you enjoy getting to meet Hoot and Kechara today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. All right. Thank you. Bye.